Tonight, we continue our series of interviews with candidates in this year's election. Our guest originally came to Boston as a refugee from Somalia. He would later become an engineer, analyst, and social entrepreneur, investing in companies started by women of color. We'd like to welcome a candidate for Councilor at Large, Saeed Abdikarim. Thank you very much for being with us, Saeed.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
I want to talk about the work that you've done already. You went to Boston Public Schools. You went on to become an engineer, a social entrepreneur. You've done so much to create opportunities in those ways. So why take this to another level with the City Council?
Because the needs of Bostonians are not being met. I couldn't sit on the sideline anymore. I am a person that believes in if you want to make change, you have to be at the table. That's why I'm running for Boston City Council at large, because the at large, seats encompasses, all of Boston. And I lived, throughout this great city in different areas, especially when I was growing up in Boston. I lived in, different public housing complexes throughout Boston. That's why I'm running.
What about your work helping women start businesses in the city of Boston? What kind of businesses were you working with?
So we concentrate on businesses that has to do with technology, media, and education. Before I get to that, I would like to talk about my work in the community that involved with working with community organizations, volunteering at different Boston public schools, teaching kids about technology, career and life skills. In terms of the working with women, minority women entrepreneurs, if information got to my desk, or someone reached out to me and you had an entrepreneur, a women entrepreneur of a minority background, and what we focused on was, does this business contribute to the local community first? Secondly, does it contribute to society as a whole? Does it advance and help people or provide information that's vital to individuals or communities?
Put that into the bigger picture, because we heard a lot of talk about things like the wealth gap. How important are those businesses to closing the gap?
It is very, very important. I am big on providing people or equipping people with skills that would bridge the wealth gap. So if those businesses, as I stated a little while ago, there was an opportunity or showed an opportunity to bridge the wealth gap, that's more encouragement to invest in that business.
I know these businesses need some startup capital, but to keep this going and building, don't they need other things, ways that they can talk to each other, get ideas from each other, even access to databases? Does the city need to help with that?
I'm glad you actually mentioned this, Chris, because the past 2 years, my team and I have been trying to build an opportunity center in the heart of Dudley. We are trying to collaborate with technological and financial institutions to be part of this. We did talk to already some banks, and they're excited. Basically, these opportunity centers will be used as a collaborative space to bring creative individuals, to bring individuals that are community centered, to share ideas and resources. And absolutely, I do agree. The city does need to have an office that caters to creative minds, people that are community centered, so they can share resources. And even if there's a space in City Hall, that'll be great.
I want to ask you about education, because you were educated in the Boston Public Schools. You've gone back as a volunteer. You're an example of the immigrant success story, but we hear too many stories about immigrants who get sidetracked, that the school system doesn't help enough. How do you improve on that?
So one of the main reasons I believe that some of the Boston public schools are not where they're supposed to be is in three competing factors. One, Boston Public Schools has one of the most diverse districts in the country, and when I say diverse, you have English learners, you have students that come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, you have, students with disabilities. So, when you have these competing factors, if you don't have, the resources, especially the financial resources, you're going to have a good chunk of your student population that are not going to be performing well. Then you have, dropout rates, that could go up the roof, and all sorts of other issues. So, in order to, tackle the education disparity, it all comes down to funding, and hopefully, the city is able to find, a way to fund the public schools, even though the funding comes from the state.
I want to ask you about some of your thoughts on housing, and I think I'm going to start with the immediate future, because we have a lot of people who've been struggling with the pandemic. They have a lot of back rent to catch up on, maybe. What are we going to do about people like that to keep them from being, tossed out?
Housing is a human right, especially no one should be homeless, or no one should have to move out in the city that they were born in, the city that they grew up in. We do have a housing crisis in the city of Boston, and we should not, because the city of Boston, it does have the financial means. When I say financial means, I mean not from City Hall, but as a city as a whole. So everyone needs to do their fair share. One way we can improve that is to increase the affordable housing units in developments, and also to work with the zoning board, because we do have a restrictive zoning where new affordable housing developments can be developed in certain areas in Boston, such as high density areas, areas closer to the transit. And a family, a single mother should not be forced to move out to the suburbs and have to deal with commuting to work, not being able to find daycare, having to pay, extra money, out of her pocket that she can't even afford for gas, having to travel extra miles.
You also have some concerns about the environment. Which are the most pressing for you?
The most pressing is, we need to have, clean parks, clean playgrounds, especially during this pandemic. A lot of our kids are home. The obesity rate, is going up. So if our parks and playgrounds are not clean and family friendly, our kids are not going to be out there. Their families are not going to be out there. Other areas that we're trying to target for the environment is to create, energy efficient transportation, energy efficient buildings, because if we have those, our public schools, can minimize their operating expenses.
Yeah, I think another question here is about the concerns over, rising sea levels, and the way you have to prepare the city for that, and maybe help people meet the expenses of being able to, be resilient enough to withstand that. Anything you'd like to see in that direction?
Absolutely. We need to have, educational resources in areas where people, don't have enough information about the environment, about, rising sea levels. And if the city has, have in place a good plan to talk to experts in this field, definitely, we can have a good environmental plan for the city of Boston.
I want to turn to public safety. As the whole country right now has its eyes on the case, the charges against Derek Chauvin in connection with the death of George Floyd. In Boston, we're on a path to reform. Are you satisfied? Is there something more that you would like to see?
Absolutely, I'm not satisfied. Because as a black man, in this country, even though throughout the country that there are steps in the right direction, just as we see it with the case of George Floyd last night, justice has not been served for black men in this country and for black folks. I do want to see better reforms in the Boston Police in terms of hiring, more cadets that are actually from the city of Boston, that are actually from, vulnerable communities. And we need to, find a resolution in terms of, finding dialogue, amongst communities and this police force, where police are actually, trusted instead of being scared of.
I want to ask you because there are many immigrants who come here, and sometimes while they concentrate on their work, they don't get quite as engaged in public life. You got very engaged. What led to that for you?
Because Chris, as it said, it takes a village to raise a child. When I first came to the U.S., majority of my time I spent either after school, in school, or I spend at one of the community centers. For example, when I was living in the public housing authority in Archdale, Rosendale, I spent a lot of time in that community center. So a lot of my neighbors, librarians, teachers, community workers, they were the ones that poured their time, their care and support, so I can chase the American dream. And that's what instilled in me, to give back to the communities that I come from, to the communities that I grew up in.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us and introduce yourself to our viewers.
Thank you very much, Chris. Pleasure to be here on the BNN News this afternoon. Thank you.
That's Saeed Abdikarim, candidate for City Councilor at Large. We'll have more news in just a moment.